Imagine standing in a quiet room where reputation means nothing. No cameras. No headlines. No fan applause. Just presence. Across from you stands a figure inspired by the philosophy of Bruce Lee, not the man himself but the mindset he represented. Fluid, observant, unshaken. And in this thought experiment, opposite that presence stands Keanu Reeves, known for immersive preparation and disciplined training for demanding film roles. But this isn't about a fight. It's about stillness. What happens when two forms of discipline enter the same space? One built on cinematic preparation, the other built on philosophical mastery. No one moves at first. The air feels different. Not tense, but aware. There's no aggression. No raised voice. No dramatic challenge. Just observation. Imagine the moment stretching slightly longer than comfort allows. Would you speak first? Or would you wait? In high-pressure environments, people often expect dominance to announce itself loudly. A step forward. A sharp gesture. A sudden shift. But what if real control looks quieter than that? Keanu's posture remains relaxed. Shoulders loose. Breathing steady. The kind of composure developed through repetition and focus. The Bruce Lee-inspired presence doesn't crowd the space. It studies it. Weight balanced. Eyes attentive. Not searching for weakness, but measuring rhythm. And here's the question most people wouldn't expect. What if the real test isn't physical at all? What if it's about who breaks the silence first? Seconds pass. The room feels smaller, not because of threat but because of awareness. This isn't a confrontation. It's a mirror. One discipline reflecting another. And somewhere in that silence, something subtle begins to shift. Not in stance. Not in distance. But in understanding. Because when calm meets calm, there's nothing to defeat. Only something to learn. Before we go any further, it's important to understand something. This isn't about proving who is stronger. It's about understanding where strength actually comes from. When people hear the name Keanu Reeves, many immediately picture intense preparation, long training sessions, precise choreography, relentless repetition for films like John Wick. He has spoken publicly about discipline, consistency, and respecting the craft. But that training was for performance, for storytelling, for camera. And yet, something interesting happens when someone trains with that level of focus for years. Even if it's for film, the mindset required is real. Early mornings, sore muscles, repetition beyond comfort, learning timing, learning control, not aggression, control. Now think about the philosophy associated with Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee wasn't just known for movement. He was known for thought, for adaptability, for the famous idea of being like water, fluid, responsive, never rigid. His legacy isn't built on domination. It's built on awareness. So when we imagine this meeting of energies, we're not imagining a clash of fists. We're imagining a clash of philosophies. Modern cinematic discipline. Timeless martial introspection. In high-stress environments, people often test each other without saying a word. It happens in boardrooms, on sports fields, even in everyday conversations. Someone leans slightly forward. Someone holds eye contact a fraction longer. Someone invades personal space just enough to see how you react. These are not acts of violence. They are silent questions. And the response determines everything. In this fictional scenario, the tension is subtle. No dramatic music swelling. No sudden movements. Just two individuals aware of the space between them. Keanu's calm isn't theatrical. It's measured. The kind of stillness built from repetition. Hitting marks, adjusting timing, understanding choreography down to the smallest detail. Across from him, the Bruce Lee-inspired presence doesn't project intimidation. It projects presence. Balanced stance. Relaxed shoulders. Breath aligned with awareness. Here's what makes this moment compelling. Neither is trying to win. They're trying to understand. Because true discipline isn't reactive. It's responsive. And there's a difference. Reactive energy flares quickly. Responsive energy waits. Reactive energy seeks validation. Responsive energy seeks clarity. This is where many viewers might expect escalation. A sudden move. A sharp shift. A defining action. But that expectation says more about us than about them. Why do we assume intensity must explode? Why do we equate silence with weakness? Second stretch. The room remains quiet. But something important is happening beneath the surface. Both individuals are regulating emotion, controlling breath, observing micro-movements. In many ways, this is more difficult than striking first. Because holding composure under perceived pressure requires internal stability. and internal stability cannot be faked for long. That's the real context of this scenario. Not combat, not dominance, but psychological balance. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The kind that doesn't rush. The kind that understands that sometimes the strongest position in the room is the one that remains centered while everyone else expects chaos. And the question now becomes deeper. If you were standing there, would you try to prove something? Or would you simply remain present? The silence doesn't break. It settles. There's a difference. Most people think tension feels loud. But real tension, the kind that tests composure, is almost invisible. In this imagined space, nothing dramatic happens. No sudden step forward. No aggressive gesture. No raised voice. Just awareness. Keanu Reeves remains steady. His breathing is controlled. Slow inhale, slower exhale. The kind of rhythm developed not for confrontation, but for precision. On film sets, timing is everything. Miss it by a fraction and the illusion collapses. That discipline translates here. Across from him, the presence inspired by Bruce Lee doesn't rush either. The posture is relaxed but not careless. Balanced but not rigid. Eyes attentive, not challenging, not retreating. Just observing. And this is where the real tension begins. Because when neither side escalates, the only thing left to confront is yourself. A subtle shift in weight. Barely noticeable. Not an advance. Just an adjustment. Distance remains the same, but perception changes. If you were watching, you might not even understand why the moment feels charged. But you'd feel it. Because humans are wired to detect intention. Even when nothing happens. This isn't about who moves first. It's about who feels the need to. In high-pressure situations, the instinct is to assert control externally. Step closer. Speak louder. Claim the space. But internal control works differently. It reduces unnecessary movement. It minimizes noise. It conserves energy. Keanu's gaze doesn't harden. It softens slightly, not in weakness but in focus. Like someone studying timing rather than threat. The Bruce Lee-inspired presence mirrors that energy. Not copying it. Matching it. Two calm systems regulating themselves in real time. Seconds pass again. Long enough for discomfort to whisper. Long enough for ego to suggest, do something. And that whisper is the true test. Because ego hates stillness. Ego wants resolution. It wants a clear winner. But discipline understands something deeper. Stillness reveals more than motion. A slight change in breathing pattern. A micro-expression. A tightening in the jaw that lasts less than a second. These are the real signals being exchanged. No one in the room is losing. No one is dominating. Instead, something more interesting is unfolding. Mutual recognition. Recognition that composure is not accidental. It's practiced. It's earned. It's maintained under pressure. And here's the moment most viewers might misunderstand. Nothing happens. No dramatic turning point. No explosive outcome. Just a subtle realization. Both presences understand the same principle. Escalation is optional. Control is intentional. And power doesn't need performance. The air feels lighter now, not because tension disappeared but because it transformed. What began as a test of space becomes a study of restraint. What began as curiosity becomes clarity. And in that quiet exchange, something shifts internally. Not stance. Not distance. But perspective. Because when two disciplined energies meet without ego, the goal isn't victory. It's alignment. And that's where the story quietly turns. And this is where everything shifts. Not outwardly. Inwardly. Up until now, the space has felt like a silent equation. Two forms of discipline measuring each other without aggression. But something subtle begins to change. Not in posture. Not in distance. In intention. The presence inspired by Bruce Lee slightly relaxes the shoulders. It's almost imperceptible. Not surrender. Not retreat. Just ease. Across the room, Keanu Reeves adjusts his stance by a fraction, redistributing weight evenly. Not preparing to advance. Preparing to remain balanced. That distinction matters. Because the shift happening here isn't about who controls the room. It's about who controls themselves. Most confrontations, whether physical, verbal, or emotional, escalate because one person feels the need to prove something. Prove strength. Prove dominance. Prove identity. But what if there's nothing to prove? The air feels different now. Less charged. More grounded. The initial tension wasn't about threat. It was about uncertainty. Two energies entering the same space without knowing how the other would respond. Uncertainty creates pressure. Clarity dissolves it. And clarity is beginning to surface. Neither presence is searching for weakness anymore. They're recognizing structure. Breathing patterns align naturally, not synchronized deliberately but steady in similar rhythm. Calm has a frequency. When two calm systems coexist, they don't collide. They stabilize. This is the moment most observers would misread. Online, someone would freeze frame this exact second and claim, "That's when it turned." But the truth is quieter. The turning point isn't visible. It's internal. Keanu's expression remains neutral, but there's a subtle softening in the eyes, the kind that signals understanding rather than challenge. Years of film preparation taught him something beyond choreography, the importance of staying composed under scrutiny. Long shoots, repeated takes, physical exhaustion, cameras inches from your face. You learn quickly that tension wastes energy. The Bruce Lee-inspired presence carries a similar awareness, but from a philosophical angle. Not performance under lights, but principle under pressure. Fluidity, adaptability, non-resistance. The famous idea of being like water wasn't about overpowering obstacles. It was about flowing around them. And suddenly the space between them doesn't feel like a battleground. It feels like a classroom. No one declared it. No one announced it. But the objective has changed. Instead of testing each other, they're learning from each other. This is the shift. Because once ego exits the equation, curiosity enters. Curiosity doesn't need dominance. It asks different questions. What can I understand here? What can I refine? Where can I grow? The silence now feels constructive, not confrontational. There's no winner emerging. No loser retreating. Just mutual respect forming without a single word exchanged. In many ways, this is harder than escalation. Escalation is easy. It's instinctive. It gives immediate resolution, even if that resolution is messy. Restraint requires maturity. Restraint requires confidence strong enough not to perform. And performance is what the outside world often expects. Drama, climax, clear outcome. But real strength rarely announces itself with spectacle. It reveals itself through choice. The choice not to advance. The choice not to react. The choice not to interpret silence as a threat. Keanu remains steady. The Bruce Lee-inspired presence remains fluid. Neither rigid. Neither forcing a moment. The room feels larger now. Not because the distance changed, but because pressure released. The test wasn't about physical capability. It was about emotional stability. And both passed. Not by overpowering, but by maintaining equilibrium. This is the reset of distance, not measured in steps but in mindset. The realization that dominance is unnecessary when discipline is present. And in that realization, the entire narrative transforms. What began as a hypothetical clash becomes something else entirely. A study in composure. A demonstration of self-regulation. A reminder that the strongest shift in any room is the one that happens within. Now pause the scene for a moment. Freeze it exactly where it softened. Where neither side advanced. Where no dramatic action took place. Because if this moment were uploaded online, the reaction would be immediate. Clips. Edits. Bold captions. Who won? Who backed down? Who had the upper hand? That's how modern perception works. We compress complexity into competition. But that question, who won, completely misses what just happened. When most people hear the names Keanu Reeves and Bruce Lee in the same sentence, imagination rushes toward comparison. Speed versus discipline. Philosophy versus preparation. Past versus present. But comparison is a habit of the audience, not necessarily the participants. Online culture thrives on outcomes. Clear endings. Victories. Losses. Rankings. Dominance charts. It's easier that way. Ambiguity requires thought. And thought takes time. If this fictional scenario were reduced to a headline, nuance would disappear instantly. The quiet shift would be edited out. The internal recalibration would be ignored. Because stillness doesn't go viral. Spectacle does. But here's the irony. The very thing that makes this moment powerful is the absence of spectacle. No explosive movement. No dramatic gesture. No public declaration. Just two disciplined energies recognizing something in each other. Online debates would likely focus on hypothetical ability, training histories, physical attributes, hypothetical matchups. But that's projection. It reveals more about what we expect from strength than what strength actually is. We've been conditioned to believe power must look forceful. That calm equals passive. That silence equals hesitation. That restraint equals weakness. But what if restraint is the highest form of control? Think about how often discussions spiral into unnecessary escalation. In comment sections, in conversations, even in daily life. One person reacts. The other responds louder. Tone sharpens. Ego enters. Suddenly the goal isn't clarity. It's victory. But victory over what? An opinion? A misunderstanding? A moment of discomfort? In our imagined room, none of that happened. There was no need. Because both sides operated from internal stability rather than external validation. That's rare. And rarity makes people uncomfortable. If a viral clip showed nothing happening, viewers might feel confused, unsatisfied, waiting for the real moment. But the real moment already passed. It happened when neither side allowed ego to dictate action. That's the shift most people overlook. The internet would demand a winner. But the scenario doesn't provide one. And that absence is intentional. Because discipline versus ego isn't a fight. It's a filter. When ego dominates, escalation feels necessary. When discipline dominates, escalation feels optional. That distinction changes everything. This is where UK audiences in particular connect differently. There's often appreciation for understatement. For subtext. For what isn't said as much as what is. The loudest interpretation is rarely the deepest one. If someone insisted, but who would win? They'd be asking the wrong question. A better question might be, who maintained control of themselves? Who resisted the pull of performance? Who allowed the moment to pass without forcing it into something dramatic? Because forcing drama is easy. Allowing silence is harder. In a culture that rewards immediate reaction, delayed response is almost rebellious. It signals confidence. It signals maturity. And most importantly, it signals security. Security doesn't rush. Security doesn't chase validation. Security doesn't need the room to declare a champion. And perhaps that's why the imagined meeting never explodes into conflict. Not because either side lacks capability, but because capability without insecurity doesn't need demonstration. That's the part the internet would struggle to package. There's no shocking twist. No humiliating defeat. No instant regret. Just a mutual understanding forming in quiet space. And maybe that's the deeper commentary here. We often assume intensity must climax. But sometimes intensity resolves itself through awareness. The shift wasn't about dominance. It was about perspective. And perspective doesn't trend easily. It grows slowly, privately, internally. So if someone asks, who won? The most honest answer might be, no one needed to. And maybe that's the point most worth sharing. Now the pace changes. Slower, quieter. Because this was never really about Keanu Reeves. And it was never truly about the philosophy associated with Bruce Lee. It was about something much closer to you. Strength isn't loud. Confidence isn't aggressive. And real discipline doesn't need witnesses. Read that again, slowly. Most people think strength shows up as dominance. As the ability to control a room. To silence opposition. To stand taller than everyone else. But the deeper version of strength is quieter. It's the ability to control yourself when something inside you wants to react. That moment in the imagined room wasn't dramatic. It was internal. And that's exactly why it matters. Because your hardest battles rarely happen in public. They happen in conversations where you feel misunderstood. In situations where someone challenges your patience. In moments when ego whispers, say something. Prove something. Win this. But winning what? An argument? An impression? A temporary emotional release? Discipline asks a different question. What outcome actually serves you? In that silent exchange we imagined, neither presence needed to escalate. Not because they couldn't, but because they didn't have to. There's power in that distinction. When you don't have to prove yourself, your choices become clearer. You respond instead of react. You assess instead of assume. You pause instead of push. Pausing is underrated. In a fast world, the pause feels uncomfortable. It feels like surrender. But it isn't. It's evaluation. It's giving yourself enough space to choose wisely. Think about the last time someone tested you, not physically but emotionally. Maybe it was a dismissive comment. A subtle challenge. A moment designed to provoke. What did you do? Did you rush to defend yourself? Did your tone sharpen? Did you feel the urge to assert dominance in some way? That urge is human. But discipline isn't about suppressing it. It's about mastering it. The imagined meeting between modern cinematic discipline and timeless martial philosophy wasn't about who was more capable. It was about who remained centered. Centered people don't chase validation. They don't rush toward conflict just because it's available. They understand something crucial. Not every challenge deserves engagement. That idea alone can change your life. Because when you stop responding to every invitation to conflict, you conserve energy for what actually matters. Energy is currency. Where you spend it determines your direction. If you spend it proving yourself to everyone who questions you, you'll constantly feel drained. If you spend it refining yourself quietly, growth becomes inevitable. The strongest presence in any room often says the least. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. Clarity doesn't panic. Clarity doesn't rush. Clarity doesn't need applause. And that's the real lesson hidden inside this fictional scenario. Composure is not accidental. It's trained. Just like physical skill is trained. Just like timing is trained. Just like awareness is trained. You build it in small moments. When you choose not to interrupt. When you choose not to escalate. When you choose to breathe before responding. Breathing sounds simple, but it resets everything. It slows your heart rate. It sharpens your thinking. It separates impulse from intention. That's power. Not loud power. Not performative power. Quiet power. The kind that stabilizes a room instead of destabilizing it. And here's something most people overlook. When you remain calm under pressure, you don't just control yourself. You influence the entire environment. Calm is contagious. So is chaos. Which one do you bring into your spaces? That's the real question this story asks. Not who would win. Not who is stronger. But who chooses stability when instability is an option. The world doesn't always reward that immediately. Sometimes loud reactions get attention faster. But attention and respect are not the same thing. Attention fades. Respect accumulates. And respect grows around people who don't need to dominate to feel secure. So think about your own life again. Where could you apply this? In work? In relationships? In disagreements? In moments when silence feels uncomfortable? The shift begins internally. Always. Because the strongest move in the room is often the one no one sees. The decision not to react. The choice to stay centered. The understanding that strength is proven through consistency, not confrontation. And once you realize that, you stop needing to win. You start choosing to grow. By now the room feels different. Not because anyone left. Not because anything dramatic happened. But because something internal settled. What began as a hypothetical moment between two disciplined presences, one inspired by Keanu Reeves and the other shaped by the philosophy of Bruce Lee, has transformed into something far more personal. It was never about conflict. It was about control. And control, real control, is invisible. Most people spend their lives trying to appear strong. They raise their voice to feel heard. They argue to feel validated. They dominate conversations to feel secure. But the strongest person in any room rarely needs to announce it. Strength isn't a performance. It's a decision. A decision to remain steady when emotions rise. A decision to listen when pride wants to interrupt. A decision to walk away when ego demands engagement. That imagined meeting never needed an outcome. Because the outcome was internal growth. If someone were still watching, waiting for a final move, they might feel surprised by the absence of spectacle. No sudden turn. No dramatic reveal. No instant regret. Just awareness. And awareness is powerful. In a world driven by reaction, awareness is rare. Think about how often people respond instantly, to messages, to criticism, to disagreement. There's a pressure to react quickly, to take a position immediately, to prove alignment or superiority. But what if the most powerful response is measured? What if silence, when chosen deliberately, carries more weight than the perfect comeback? The fictional moment we explored demonstrates something simple. Calm is not passive. Calm is controlled. When two disciplined energies meet without ego, there is no explosion. There is evaluation. There is respect. There is space. And space changes everything. Space allows thought. Space allows emotion to settle. Space allows perspective to widen. Without space, everything feels urgent. With space, everything becomes intentional. That's the deeper lesson. You don't have to accept every invitation to compete. You don't have to prove your capability to people who don't understand it. You don't have to win every exchange to maintain your identity. The strongest person in the room is often the one who doesn't need to win, because needing to win suggests something fragile underneath. But choosing not to escalate suggests something solid. Security, maturity, confidence built quietly over time. If you imagine that room one last time, you'll notice something subtle. Neither presence walked away diminished. Neither lost respect. If anything, mutual recognition increased it. And that's how real strength behaves. It doesn't subtract from others. It doesn't need comparison to feel valid. It stands independently. In your own life, this might look small at first. Choosing not to argue. Choosing to clarify instead of criticize. Choosing to pause before replying. Choosing not to internalize every challenge. But those small decisions compound. They build a reputation, not the loud kind but the stable kind. People begin to sense that you don't react impulsively, that you don't seek unnecessary conflict, that you remain grounded. And grounded people are trusted. Trust is stronger than intimidation. Respect lasts longer than fear. That's why the imagined encounter never exploded into chaos. Because chaos is easy. Stability is earned. And maybe that's the quiet surprise of this entire story. The real power wasn't in what happened. It was in what didn't. No ego-driven escalation. No forced climax. No dramatic proof of superiority. Just two disciplined approaches recognizing something shared. And now the final question isn't about them. It's about you. When pressure rises in your life, what do you default to? Reaction? Or regulation? Do you chase validation? Or do you choose alignment? Because every day presents small versions of that room. Moments where someone tests your patience. Moments where silence feels uncomfortable. Moments where ego whispers that you should prove something. In those moments, remember this. Strength isn't loud. Confidence isn't aggressive. And discipline doesn't need an audience. The strongest person in the room isn't the one who wins. It's the one who doesn't need to. If this perspective shifts how you define power, even slightly, then the lesson has already done its work. And sometimes, that quiet shift is the most powerful ending of all.